Hello friends, this is Anton and you are on the Blackroom channel. Today we will talk about surround channels, the second most important speakers in a home or public cinema after the front ones. It will be interesting. Let's go. Historically, sound in cinema has always been initially from the front. Even during the silent film era, when there was no sound at all with the film, a person would sit in front and play the piano to accompany the movie. Then sound was introduced, and accordingly people finally began to speak. Then, to sing. And in fact, musicals have greatly influenced the development of technology and sound quality in cinemas. And then came the era of fantastic cinema, which was meant to transport us to a completely different galaxy, where we had never been. We had no idea what sounds were there or how it all happened. And in order for us to believe in what is happening on the screen, effect channels were invented. It was in Star Wars that these effect channels were used for the first time. The Dolby surround sound emerged at that time. Back then there were even mono channels. It's just the effects channel which not only has something happening in the front part of that hemisphere in the cinema, but also creates certain surprises behind you. So you would flinch and, accordingly, turn around. And were actually frightened by those things that made you believe in the reality of what was happening in a galaxy far, far away. Why is this so important? Well, in reality, when you watch and the sound comes only from the front, you perceive it as if it's some kind of concert, like something happening only around you. When you have the opportunity to place sound not only from the front, but also from the right, slightly behind, or directly behind you, you gain a completely new dimension of engagement with what is happening on the screen. Although the picture may only be in front, the sound complements this image and allows you to experience what is happening in front of you as if you were actually in that place. And the sounds, all the atmospheres that the characters hear, are also relevant for you. This added a new level of realism. And why did I say that surround channels are the second most important speakers after the front ones? And especially the center channel, about which we, by the way, made a separate video. Then follow the link, take a look if you haven't seen it or missed it. The center channel is the most important speaker, as it carries 80% of what happens in the film, specifically the dialogue. Then come the fronts, and finally the surrounds. Why are the surrounds so important? Yes, it's all because, from the perspective of psychoacoustics, the human ear is significantly better adapted to determine the direction of sounds coming from our horizontal plane. Everything that is especially in front of us, you see, yes, how the outer part of our ear is shaped, and it is precisely designed to capture sounds coming from the front the best. But when sounds come from the side, we can identify them very well, due to the difference in time arriving at the right and left ear, and the phase, which is influenced by the shape of our outer ear. Here we have sound coming from one phase. This ear, even through the head, through certain features of skull construction, also hears that sound with some specific changes. Our brain combines these two sounds and forms an understanding of what that sound is and where it came from. We perceive and position sounds coming from above much worse. And why is that, friends? It's because historically, or rather evolutionarily, we are much better adapted to hear everything that happens around us. Well, especially from the front, to survive. The historical part ends here. Now let's talk about what types, how many, what is important, what is forgivable, what is ideal, and everything about surround channels. The first thing, probably the technological aspect, is what kind of speakers they should be. Well, first of all, there is no sense or possibility in frequently installing such large, powerful speakers that play the full frequency range, especially in a home theater, where we always have bass management or cutting off all bass frequencies, redirecting them to the subwoofers. That is why it is very convenient when the surround channel speaker system is significantly more compact compared to the front speakers. And this is exactly what allows it to be thin, relatively small, either to hang on the wall or to place somewhere on a shelf. And it stands there without interfering with the interior, and in a full home theater. It easily hides in the wall and is covered by fabric. Now, regarding sound and sound pressure and its overall quality, according to cinema standards, surround channels should provide approximately 2 dB less volume in the main listening area compared to the front speakers. This is the cinema standard. In home setups, everything is simplified. They also need to provide that same reference level, the infamous 105 dB. Although now, our esteemed colleagues from the Sadia organization have come up with 4 levels of cinema performance. However, for simplicity's sake, let's simplify and say that these channels should be able to play as loudly as your front main speakers. And by the way, this is not a problem because you are not using bass modules. You don't need to create bass here. Basically, it's not that important on the fronts either, but sometimes it can be useful. And because of that, the high-frequency section can be significantly more effective when it is cut from the bottom and all the bass is sent to the subwoofer. You can get that loud sound of mid and high frequencies from a much more compact speaker at the listening position. That is why they can be significantly more compact than the front speakers. But they must play just as loudly. And of course, without overloading and without blasting in your ear. The next aspect is timbral identity. In other words, ideally, the rear speakers should sound just as good as the front speakers without any adjustments. But how can she do that? It's because she has the same speakers for the mid and high frequencies. In this case, the two-way speaker, here and the speaker, here are exactly the same as the one behind the screen. This already guarantees that pink noise, when played like any other sounds, will sound very similar from both the front and the surround. And this is very important for what? It is important so that the sound, moving around the room, does not change its timbral color, so that it seems like a real moving sound in the room, rather than some abstract sound effect jumping from one speaker to another. When it remains consistent, you believe in what is happening around you. That is why it is a very bad idea to mix different types of brands, speaker technologies, the size of these speakers, the type of enclosure such as ported or sealed, etc., between the components of your audio system. At the very least, the mid-high frequency section should be identical, and that already provides excellent starting points for a great result. Dispersion is also very important, or the pattern of sound distribution, especially concerning the mid and high frequencies emitted by the speaker. Well, let's say it projects sound at 90 degrees to you, and everything outside of that angle significantly changes in sound, and roughly speaking, the higher frequencies are hardly audible at all, but at 90 degrees it plays confidently no matter where you sit in relation to it. This parameter is very important for surround sound, and it is generally considered that the wider the dispersion at high frequencies, ideally reaching 180 degrees, the better the speaker will perform as a surround. This is related to the fact that images moving between such speakers are maximally not localized in space. In other words, you create a certain sense of environment and the sound seems to come from somewhere over there, but you can't precisely tie it to a specific speaker, for example. And when he moves from one speaker to another, it is done as smoothly as possible. But if your speaker is indeed directional, you know the angle of dispersion, it is very important that all the people you want to provide good surround sound for are seated within the area covered by that dispersion angle. It is also important that this surround channel from Alcon's audio plays across the entire frequency range. At these 90 degrees, for example, it operates from 1 kHz to 20,000 Hz. It really delivers across this entire range, meaning it's essentially all the upper mid-range and the highest frequencies, those 90 degrees. This is the so-called constant directivity waveguide. It is very important that the sound changes uniformly as you move away from the speaker. If there is a dip at a certain frequency, when you deviate from the speaker by 10 degrees, you will immediately lose the connection, and it will seem to you that the sound has changed, and that is bad. And if you are using speakers for surround sound, the higher the frequency, the narrower this dispersion becomes. And closer to 20,000 Hz, at the limit of our hearing, they actually turn into a kind of laser or flashlight. Imagine what the surround sound is like there. And for how many viewers in the hall you will achieve the perfect environment and transition of these sound images? Not very well. Therefore, whether it is a constant directivity controlled dispersion angle or simply the widest possible dispersion angle of the speaker, the larger the area of the audience will receive a similar sound and believe in what is happening around them. That is why in home installations you could often encounter speakers known as bipolar or dipolar even until recently and still today. When they have two pairs of speakers at 90 degrees like this, and God forbid they play in phase, they simply expand this dispersion through a straightforward method of duplicating speakers that play slightly in different directions. However, they have their own problems. If you stand strictly between them, there will be a significant dip due to the cancellation of sound coming from that pair of speakers. But there are also speakers that operate in a bipolar mode. This means that the left and right sides play out of phase. Yes, your speaker then instantly gets lost in the room. You don't understand where the sound is coming from. But this sound is incorrect because in studios, the sound was mixed on monopole speakers. Therefore, ideally, the surround speakers should be the same as the front ones. So, it's one set of speakers that emit sound in phase. No tricks. Because otherwise, The concept originally envisioned by the sound engineer is lost. The next aspect is how many surround channels, how many specific speakers you need to place around you to achieve an excellent surround sound effect. Look, for one person it's enough to hang 2 surround speakers and achieve what is called a 5.1 system. This is when your acoustic systems are positioned somewhere around 100–120 degrees. In this zone relative to your head when you are sitting on the couch. And you will feel good, even if an airplane starts flying around you or a motorcycle is riding on a special test track, you will believe in what is happening. But when a person is sitting, for example, next to you, and is not strictly positioned between them, all these images will start to blur. And why is that? Because there will not be enough resolution channels for these sound images to move through space relative to the already shifted person, as evenly as if they were sitting in the middle. This is exactly the case for which the surround sound extension, the rear surround channels, was invented. So the 7.1 system became available to us at some point. They don't necessarily allow one person to hear the surrounding sound better. No. I mean, 2 channels were quite enough for him. But for a wider area, for 3 listeners, or for 6 sitting in 2 rows, it will be much better for the sound to travel around the room. And they will more evenly believe in the same thing happening around them if we add what is called resolution. Resolution in the sound channels that are physically located in the room. And by adding 2 channels at the back, we actually increase this resolution, allowing sound to truly emanate from the rear space relative to us, not from the left, right, and a little behind, but directly from behind us. Accordingly, in a 7.1 system, we have 4 surround channels in the base. In public commercial cinemas, this system is called Dolby Surround EX. And now it is essentially the de facto standard, where most cinemas and most screening rooms have exactly this resolution format. But there is a particular feature. In order for the entire listening area to more or less similarly perceive the surrounding sound, the surround channels in large cinemas are duplicated, forming what are known as arrays of surround sound. And you can go to any cinema and see a row of hanging speakers on the right wall, and on the left, those are the left and right surround channels. And on the back wall, there is also a line, and there are usually fewer of them, of course, and they are typically divided into 2 channels, which are the rear channels of the Dolby Surround EX system. But movie content often comes to us in just 5.1, and then the rear channels, which could play separately, are simply glued to the side ones, resulting in a format that plays like a G shape in 5.1. Unfortunately, that's just how life is. But in home systems, it is also possible to find more than 4 surround channels. Firstly, surround channels can also be duplicated. And this was also very often handled by installers when we had a home theater with several rows. Especially when there are 3 rows, it makes a lot of sense to add surround channels so that everyone receives a similar sound. Although the localization of sounds moving around the room, these stereo images, by the way, stereo is not just what happens between your left and right channels. Stereo is a phantom effect created between any 2 channels in your multi-channel system, which is why surround channels are also sources of sound between which these stereo images can actually move. So, accordingly, they also created arrays of channels, like in a large cinema, when you have several rows in a home theater. This allowed for a more even surround effect. The rear channels were rarely duplicated. But now, with the Dolby Atmos format for home having existed for over 10 years, the number of channels is actually determined by the area for which you want to create the most similar, again, effect of sound movement in the room. And in a home, there can be as many as 34 Dolby Atmos channels, and these stereo images will move between all of them in any plane, including on the ceiling. Returning to large cinemas, let's talk about the placement of surround channels. You have probably noticed that they are hung quite high there, especially in halls that are not associated with the Dolby Atmos format, and even in those they still remain hanging high, a few meters higher. All of this is done so that the channels are not close to any specific person sitting in, for example, the extreme seats in a given row. So that the effect of the sound source seems to come from somewhere over there, but not specifically from any particular speaker. Because the closer you get to a speaker, the louder the volume increases in a logarithmic progression, meaning it starts to rise very quickly. And when you have one speaker dominating, screaming in your ear, you only hear it, and it pulls you out of what is happening on the screen. And of course they are hung higher, so that you not only receive sound in surround, but also experience a more elevated spatial sound overall. And in home theaters, even before the arrival of the Dolby Atmos format, surround channels were also placed higher, somewhere at least 60 centimeters above your ear, sometimes even a meter higher. Everything is, again, precisely so that they do not play too close to your ear and do not pull you out of what is happening on the screen. But when the Dolby Atmos format appeared, there was no longer a need to invent some effect to make it sound like it's coming a little from the ceiling. Now there are separate channels in the ceiling to reproduce sound specifically from a three-dimensional hemisphere. Accordingly, the requirements for surround channels have changed a bit. And the practice of their placement is now a necessary and sufficient condition for raising them up so that the head of the neighboring viewer does not interfere with you receiving full sound. Accordingly, hanging the surround channel about 10-15 degrees at most from the main listening position is sufficient for the direct sound to reach the heads of people sitting in all rows. This is the main principle. There is no longer any point in raising the speaker higher. And about the placement? Again, when you have a 7.1 system, the surround speakers can be placed in the area, in this zone, which can sometimes be a bit further than your viewing line. So now the requirement is not 100 degrees, but rather about 80-100. 80-100 is normal when you have a rear surround channel, because you will create the effect of sound moving smoothly, even if the speaker is slightly in front of you sitting in the main spot. But I do not recommend doing that, so it should either be at 90 degrees or slightly back, around 100-110 degrees. An excellent location for the front speakers. If you only have 2 rows in your home theater, and just 1 pair of side surrounds, you should place them exactly in the middle, between the heads of the first and second rows. This way, both groups will benefit, so to speak, so that everyone can somewhat feel this surround effect, and these channels, the side ones, are still the most important. Very often, we cannot artificially create sound from the back. Most of the audio tracks of our films, especially those on streaming in the compressed Dolby Digital format, are all in 5.1. That's it. You won't see any 7.1 there. 7.1 is only uncompressed sound, and only the processor artificially creates and sends sound to the rear surround channels. And if, for some reason, the processor does not do this, and your speaker is positioned too far forward for the second row, for example, then the surround effect will simply disappear for them. For them, these channels will only function at the level of the wide channels. By the way, we have a separate video on wide channels or front wide channels that has been on our Blackroom channel for a long time. These can also be referred to as ambient channels, which were introduced in the Dolby Atmos standard. And they closed off this surrounding sound, which we used to have only from the surrounds, the rear surrounds, and the fronts. The sound between the screen and the side surrounds was often uneven and would suddenly jump, making it seem like it was coming from somewhere behind us. Now, with the addition of 2 more channels, they have closed this vicious circle. I will also leave a link to the video in the description so you can check it out for further narration about the surround channels. Well, what else can be said about surround sound? These are super important speakers that create both the mood and the immersive effect, and they can even scare you when something suddenly happens behind you. When bullets are flying in James Bond, it's truly a spectacle. You just sit there and really feel like you're in this bulletproof car with James Bond, and from all sides, they're shooting at you with automatic weapons. Only with properly set up surround speakers can you achieve this effect. Of course, they need to be calibrated correctly, with all delays adjusted, levels balanced, and everything equalized. In general, professional calibration has to be done. By the way, we have already made more than 1 video about it. I won't even leave any links, friends, so just subscribe right now to the Blackroom channel to revisit the topics that interest you the most, about home theaters and cinema halls at your convenience. You will definitely find more than 300 videos to watch. I'll provide useful content, and you subscribe. What mistakes do home theater enthusiasts or installers most often make when setting up audio systems? Most often, these mistakes are actually dictated by the compromises they have to make, as they have nowhere to place or hang the surround speakers. The only option left is to install them directly into the ceiling. You know, there are these ceiling-mounted speakers that can fit neatly into the drywall, flush with the grills, but they will play from the ceiling. With all the consequences, that is, you will not achieve the correct localization of what is happening around you. The sound will just go up to the ceiling from behind like this. Well, this will be an effect. They will become effect channels, full-fledged ambient channels, especially if you decide to add a Dolby Atmos channel on the ceiling in the form of similar round speakers embedded in drywall. The entire Dolby Atmos effect will be blurred. This is because the sound will not be coming from the right place. Well, if you want to hear how it plays in the most correct and realistic way, I invite you to our showroom. We regularly hold open house days for everyone interested, for all enthusiasts, for anyone who wants to experience a truly amazing, perfectly designed home theater with super modern acoustics in simply ideal locations, featuring speakers, huge subwoofers, and all of that. It has been finely calibrated. The calibration took several days. I invite you, friends. We will definitely indicate the date of the next event in our Telegram channel, so if you are not subscribed to it yet, please go ahead and subscribe. There are not only company news but also news from our global industry. I will leave all the links in the description. Write in the comments what questions you have left about Surround and the Surround channels. I will try to personally answer all of them. Well, as always, it was Anton, the founder of Blackroom, with you. See you soon in new videos. Goodbye, everyone.